So with that, I think we can start.
Oh, yeah. So if we have any questions in the room, we'll go to the room. I see Richard, too.
Johnny, out of the myriad of experiments that you guys were doing up there on station, which one did you find the most rewarding and why?
Hey, Richard. I think if I tap into maybe the medical or physiology side of my brain, the ones where I had an opportunity to work in the life sciences glove box. And so that's a very high-tech piece of hardware we have in the Japanese module. And one of the experiments we got to do was Mabel. It was the study of bone stem cells in different media and how different environments could preclude bone loss, which would be important for astronauts and for people living on Earth who are suffering from bone and musculoskeletal related diseases. That one was particularly very interesting for me. I'd say also the one that I had a lot of fun with was maybe more the nerd and gamer side of me. And there was a great experiment where we got to interact with robots with centers all around the world. And I had joysticks, I had very advanced controllers that were connected to these robots. And the idea was to see if astronauts maybe in orbit can interact with robots that were on the surface of, say, a planetary body. And if you do various experiments or various tasks without having to step foot onto that surface.
Thank you, Johnny. Okay, we'll now go and take our first question from the phone bridge. First up will be Robert Pearlman from collectSPACE.
Hi, thanks for taking my question and welcome back to Earth. Due to the government shutdown, we really did not get to see you and your crew on November 2nd when the milestone was reached of 25 years of a continuous human presence on the ISS. Can you describe what you and your crewmates did that day to mark the occasion? And speaking of marking, did you designate the day somehow permanently on the station's walls or in some other means to mark this was 25 years?
Yes, we did. We weren't able to share it in real time, but the crew certainly was able to share it with the ground. We talked to the flight control teams all across the world to commemorate that day over space to ground. And then the crew ourselves, we got together and we broke some bread over the dinner table in the service module where it all started. And we tried to recreate a very famous photograph that I think of when I think of Expedition 1. And all of the crewmates, we got together. We had a great dinner. We had a good toast with juice, and we took that picture, which I think has been shared since then. And we've all have matching blue polos, and we're able to get the 25-year logo up in the background. And it was a great opportunity to reflect on just the past 25 years of humans in spaceflight. And it's hard to imagine, but many people today in this world, for as long as they've been alive, we've had humans in space, operating in space, living in space, coexisting. And I think that's one of the greatest human engineering feats that we've had.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Thanks, Robert. All right, next we'll go on the phone bridge. We'll have a question from Manuel from Exploración Space.
Hi, thank you so much. Manuel Masanti from Exploración Espacial. Congratulations, Johnny, on an incredible mission, successful, tons of science. But, I was wondering, what's next for Jonny Kim? Are you, besides spending Christmas and New Year's Eve with your family, do you see yourself coming back to the station to do more science, or do you see yourself like more targeting to the moon?
Hi, Manuel. I tell this a lot to people, and it might sound weird coming from an astronaut. My main drive for becoming an astronaut was not to go to space. Of course, that's part of the job, but for me, it was a much more intrinsic, deeper desire to be able to serve on the platform of public service that we have at NASA in the name of science exploration. And that part has always called out to me, and it still calls out to me more than ever. And so in that, I would love to go back to space. But it's not something that I feel that I need to do. I am very, very passionate about maximizing one's value and the people you work with, the value that they bring, and bringing out the best in everyone. I think that is one of the greatest forms of leadership that we can do for each other. And so that's what I'm very interested in. I think that co-aligns with our goals on the space station and with Artemis, our return to the moon. And so I'm excited for what that future brings.
All right. Thank you for your question, Manuel. All right, next up we have a question from online. What experiences on orbit surprised you?
How easy things were hard and how hard things were easy. Let me give you an example. So I can simply put this bottle of water down right here and turn my head, and I know it will be there. Okay. I can open up a bag of water bottles and just simply move it from one bag to the other very easily. That is extremely hard to do in space. You'll open up a bag and everything just kind of spills out. What you end up doing through experience, trial and error, is that you'll open up a little tiny slit on this bag and you'll take out the one thing you need and then you'll quickly close it up because you don't want anything else to float out of there. And then I'll put it where I need to and I'll close that up. And then I'll open this up and get out the next thing. It's incredibly inefficient. But after you lose enough things in space, you realize that's the way to do it. That's the easy stuff that's hard. The hard stuff that's easy, I can grab this entire table, like if it was 10 times as heavy as this, I could grab it and I could just push it with one finger and translate it down the module. No problem. So easy things are hard and hard things are easy in space.
All right, one more from online. What did you miss while in space, and what was the first thing you did once you were back on Earth?
Okay, so I know what I'm supposed to say or what I should say, but I'm just going to be honest. Of course, I missed my family.
Right.
That's like the easiest, most authentic answer. I missed my wife and my kids and my dog, and now I had a second dog, so that was fun to come home to. I missed weather. I missed food. I missed cooking. I really like to cook. All of those other things. But the thing I really, really missed was unfettered access to technology. I'm just a big nerd and a technologist at heart, and I like to have 24/7 access on my own time through a phone or the computer to the latest LLM model or research or technical manuals, and that kind of access to information is what I have always craved, and so I kind of missed my phone. That's like, I know, healthy. I missed healthy access to phones. How about that?
All right, we'll take one more online for now. We'll go to James Dowling from West Hartford Community Interactive.
Yes, hi, Dr. Kim. This is James Dowling Healy, West Hartford Community Interactive. I just wanted to say thank you and welcome back, and congratulations on the successful mission and the new dog. My question has to do with adapting to space and then adapting back to the return and gravity, everything like that. I'm wondering what tips and tricks the other astronauts provided for you and what worked best for you, and if those are going to be codified officially or if they're just sort of unofficial advice from your colleagues.
Hey, James. So there's a lot of tips and we call it gouge, on what to do or what not to do. I think the interesting part about it is that as humans, we all have different reactions to the same stimuli. So what might work for someone may not work for someone else. And a lot of it happens to be experimentation. And in fact, if you talk to a lot of the veteran flyers, their first experience or their second experience doesn't even match their first one, despite repeating kind of the same protocols they might have done. For me, on the way up, I did not take any pharmacological meds. I kind of wish I had, because I was quite motion sick once I got to the space station, and it lingered for a few days after that. I felt like I had learned my lesson on the way up, and maybe I need to be a better physician. I think physicians can be the worst patients because we just don't take medicine very often. But I thought, hey, I'm gonna try something, and so I took some motion sickness medications on the way down. Don't know if that helped, if I would have been just fine, but actually I felt like my recovery on the ground was drastically different than my on the way up. I felt very little to no nausea or motion sickness, some dizziness, and which is really attributable to the vestibular system. We have these inner ear organs with fluid called lymph in them, and they tell us, they got these little hairs, and they tell us about acceleration, and that kind of just turns off when you're in space because you're not feeling the force of gravity. And that was very jarring, disorienting, but fortunately didn't have any kind of motion sickness tied with that. As far as advice, I don't know. I think listening to your flight surgeon and just trying to experiment with what might work.
Thank you for your question. All right, we'll go back online. We have a question. It says, what were some of your favorite moments looking out the cupola?
The auroras, for sure. We get quite spoiled. Actually, one of the first nights, the very first day I had arrived, Don Pettit, there was a beautiful aurora, and Don had me close my eyes, and he brought me over to the cupola, and he said, open them. And it was the most beautiful aurora I had seen at that point in time. I had not seen that many in my life, but it was wholly unappreciated by me because I was very, very sick. And I was just like, it's like, Don, I think I needed another couple days. But it was still beautiful. And then we just continued to see beautiful auroras. I would monitor the KP index on the NOAA website, and we get very spoiled because after, the KP index on a scale of 1 to 9, 9 being very geomagnetically strong, so beautiful auroras, you get used to these auroras at 3, 4, and they're beautiful, but then you're like, okay, I'm used to it. I won't get out of bed unless it's like a 5. We had a coronal event, pretty significant one, I think in November, and I think it resulted in a lot of people in North America being able to see these beautiful auroras in places that you normally wouldn't. You can only imagine what it looked like from it was a KP index of almost 8.59. I had never seen it that high. We were ecstatic. NASA was a little concerned for the additional radiation we would have, but we were like, well, at least we get to see some beautiful auroras. So that auroras, and also, unfortunately, there was, I think, just a lot of natural events like hurricanes and tsunamis that we did see that I know is attributed to so much destruction on the Earth. But we were able to at least capture some of those moments in all their grandeur.
Thank you. And just as a reminder on the phone bridge, if you have a question, press star 1 to join the queue. And if your question has been answered, press star 2 to remove your hand. We'll go online for another question, and then we'll go to the room if the room has any more questions. Online it says, you shared a lot of wonderful videos and stories on your social media pages. What stories or discoveries are you excited to continue to share?
That's so easy for me to answer because it's not the story. The story of science is very important. But what I believe now, after having spent 8 months in space, is that the most important reason, the most important thing we can bring back when we put humans in space, on the space station, back on the lunar surface, one day on Mars, is the human story, that human condition we bring back, that human connection we make. I think that leads to inspiration, which is one of the most beautiful gifts we can give to the next generation. That inspiration to want to make the world a better place, to be the best version of yourself. That really touches me and my soul. And of all the things that we got to do on the space station, that was the most important part for me, was sharing those human components of the space station, of the times when we were around the Node 1 dinner table or the SM dinner table and us celebrating with each other through the holidays. Those will stick with me, and I think those are the most important aspects of human spaceflight.
you. Okay, we'll go back to the room.
Richard 2 of the Post newspaper. Johnny, a follow-up question. Say someone that's fresh to the Corps gets selected for a mission. What advice would you give them as someone that just came back from 8 months on the ISS and all these fresh experiences in your mind? Advice you give to them to help prepare them to be successful?
Yeah, Richard, I actually got to have this privilege to do just a couple days ago. Frank Rubio, a classmate and a friend of mine, is the supervisor for the newest class of astronauts who arrived not too long ago. And I got to share 30, 45 minutes with them, and they were able to ask me about my experience and any questions that they had. And this question came up. And my response to them was that the most important aspect, the most important trait to have for a successful space mission is good interpersonal relationships. Is having the skills we term as soft skills. Is having the ability to listen, to lead, to have compassion, most importantly, have empathy. I think we like to focus on flying jets or doing spacewalks, doing the really fun and hard and cool things in space. And those are important, absolutely. But mission success is not so much dependent on those technical skills. They are important, but for the most part, I mean, as astronauts, we are trained to a very high level in our technical expertise. And so technical expertise and competence is usually not a limiting factor. What's important is how we treat each other and how we do in those teams. Because going to the moon and going to the Mars is going to be a very long trip in a very small space. And if you do not get along or know how to get along with your crewmates, that is going to have a much bigger effect on mission success than any other technical skill.